welcome to you. You're listening to the Music Business Buddy with me, Johnny Amos, podcasting out of Birmingham in England. I'm the author of the book, The Music Business for Music Creators, available in hardback, paperback and ebook formats. I am a music creator with a variety of credits. I'm a consultant, an artist manager and a senior lecturer in both music business and music creation. Wherever you are and whatever you do, consider yourself welcome to this podcast and to a part of this community. I'm here to try and educate and inspire music creators from all over the world in their quest to achieving their goals by gaining a greater understanding of the business of music. Okay, something that dawned on me in recent weeks, everybody. It was after my conversation with Elliot from Duetti. It made me think that actually what we really need is a really high-end music catalogue specialist. So I did some research, right? I looked around the room, I looked around the internet, and I found a guy on LinkedIn called Robin Maddicott. And oh my God, I am so glad I found him. He is my guest for this week's episode. Let me tell you a little bit about him, because some of the things that he reveals in today's episode are absolutely fascinating. He has a brilliant mind. So he is a music catalogue specialist, right, with over 20 years of experience across metadata, distribution, auditing, rights management. He's currently the Chief Growth Officer at Telegram Studios, where he focuses on maximising the value of the company's master and publishing portfolios through collaborations with artists and labels and catalogue activation, long-term rights strategy, that kind of thing. His work basically combines creative catalogue activation with deep operational and financial optimization, right? So on the creative side, that includes sort of, A&R driven collaborations, sync, remix, reissue strategies, shaping how catalogues are presented, that kind of thing. On the data and infrastructure side, it spans large-scale catalogue audits, metadata, royalty analysis, multi-partner servicing designed to ensure accuracy, long-term value, etc. Alongside that, he's also involved with catalogue acquisitions, right? So actively sourcing new opportunities, supporting valuations, structuring transactions, and that kind of thing. His focus is on building durable, ethical growth from music rights, right? Whether that's on the publishing side or on the recording side. And his knowledge is so good. It's so now. Some of the things he talks about in this interview today, were a real education, a real eye-opener for me, especially when he talks about how to solve some of the AI problems. You've heard me talk about, and when I say the problems, by the way, what I really mean, I do embrace AI, but some of the problems in regards to music rights, right? So the remunerative side of usage, when copyright usage is used, as training data, right? We've talked about that before on the podcast. It's a big subject at the top of the mainstream agenda, but the reason I'm mentioning it right now is because Robin addresses something that might actually solve it. There's a long way to go in it, but it's knowing where to start is often the difficulty, and Robin presents that very beautifully in this interview, alongside many other things, especially in regards to kind of, a true collection of rights and the nuances between different organisations around the world. It will pay dividends to hear some of the things that he says, so I'm going to hand over to the interview now. Robin, welcome to the Music Business Buddy. It's really, really good to have you here. Thank you for joining me. First and foremost, Robin, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Johnny. I'm very well. Yeah, it's a cold, rainy day here in Copenhagen, but I'm hopeful that spring is just around the corner and feeling overall quite positive.
Yes. Yeah. Do you find that, being a Brit, but being in Denmark, do you find it takes Denmark a little longer to reach spring than it does in the UK?
Yes, and I also every year get sort of tripped up by this period we're coming into now, which is the sort of post-New Year, well, basically the main part of winter, because I kind of get past the New Year, I think, okay, that's it, because, winters can be pretty bleak here in Scandinavia. And so I get to this stage and I'm like, right, as I said, spring's on its way, etc. And then I gets to kind of February, and then it's like, this is when it gets really cold, and it can start to get even more grueling. And then, but then again, it's like, yeah, to answer your point, it does feel like it takes longer, but when it does arrive, it's a glorious thing. So there you go.
Oh yeah. It's worth it when you get there. Absolutely. Robin, there's loads of things I could ask you about, but let's start with with metadata, right, or the importance of it. In regards to distribution to the DSPs in particular, how important is it, just as, for labels and for independent artists, to be able to kind of get their metadata right? And what can they do to ensure accuracy?
Yeah, well, the way I tend to think about it is this: it's basically metadata is the instruction manual that you're sending out when you're delivering music to DSPs and also to other services, such as CMOs and PROs, etc., which will become, is also extremely relevant. Basically, what you're doing is you're giving them an instruction on how to process the product or the asset that you're sending them, and as it's getting processed by these systems downstream, it's a very sort of, on their side, a very black and white process, if that's the right term. There's not really any room for nuance. So basically, a small error or seemingly small error on the label or the artist side when it comes to putting the data together and delivering it can result in a much a more dramatic, should we say, issue on the other end. And examples of that can be things like, if you have a slight formatting issue in your artist name, it can create a completely new profile on a DSP, and then your product gets mapped to completely the wrong page. I've seen that so many times over the years on the catalogs I've worked with, even for like really significant big artists, and you just dig a tiny little bit on big platforms as well, on Spotify's and Tidal's and Apple, Amazon, etc. So that's kind of just creating a lot of mess. It's you're missing out on audience because your discoverability is seriously kind of impacted by that. And then there's other things such as like when it comes down to how you format kind of things like featured artists and remixes and stuff like that, that can also have a big kind of downstream knock-on effect, in the sense that if you have a high-profile remixer, say, involved with your track, and you deliver it incorrectly, and again, I see this all the time, that remixer might just appear like in the title field, or it might not be linked to their correct artist profiles. So there's all these sort of like exponential knock-on effects that can end up being quite significant. And if you do it right, and you know how to, properly, input and manage the data, there's ways you can sort of optimize as well. So something I've seen happening a lot more recently is when it comes to, just to stay on the remix example, rather than listing a remix as a featured artist, I'm seeing people increasingly list them as sort of secondary, primary artists. And the advantage to that is that release will then show up on the remixers page as a new release, sort of at the top of their profile, as if it was a new release by them, basically, rather than being tucked away on the sort of appears on section, which obviously, you're sort of increasing your visibility significantly by doing that. And obviously you need to have the permission of the artists involved to do that, which is obviously super important. But, if possible, that's a great little trick just to kind of, as I said, increase your visibility on the platforms. And that's sort of, and then in terms of like what's happening on the back end, like there's a lot of sort of back end processes on the DSP side that they're using to determine like algorithmically where your music's likely to be placed in sort of algorithmic playlists, and based on genre and based on different fields, and basically so the more accurate you can make it basically from the outset, the better. And that's becoming more and more important, I would say, which I'm guessing we may get to, but in the advent of AI and so on, it's like, there's an increased focus on metadata, and it's so on that side is super important. And then another kind of equally important area to look at with it is in terms of how you're sort of on the revenue side, basically. And again, it's a case of you're essentially instructing these services how to push your product out, how to display it on the shopfront, and also then how to return the money to the correct parties. And again, if you don't kind of deliver it with the correct data in the first place, the trouble is systems start to, once the data's out there, it starts to get multiplied across many different types of systems. It's in, UGC libraries, it's in lyric libraries potentially, et cetera, et cetera. When you kind of go back and start to try and unravel that, it's a bit like unraveling spaghetti, it's sort of meshed in.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, so it's very, very important, I would say. And then as a third sort of final point, increasingly, as I'm sort of work on the, on the music, finance, catalog side of things, having a catalog with clean and accurate metadata is ultimately adding sort of long-term value to your catalog. Should you ever wish to sort of explore a sale in the future, I can tell you from experience, having that data just, properly verified and stored as you go is a really sensible thing to do. And also, by far and away, the best time to do it is just after the creation of the music or during the process, because that's when all the, other people that are involved in the making of the record are sort of, nearby, and you're able to get all the details you need. You can remember who played what and everything, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little bit of admin that can have a, disproportionately large effect on the actual outcome of what it is you're recording.
Yeah,
in that sense.
Yeah, God, solid advice. There's a lot to think about there. Do you know, just linking back to that last point there, Robin, the idea of music IP being like, an asset class these days, much more so perhaps than even before in terms of like catalogue sales on the publishing side and on the recording side. I was talking recently to Elliot, head of growth at Duetti. He was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about that subject, and actually just linking what he was saying then to something that you've just said. Surely a part of trying to value a catalogue and that due diligence that goes into it on an accountancy level, surely a part of that has to be, how accurate is the collection, and which subsequently links back to exactly what you just said, right, about like accuracy on metadata. It's perhaps something that, certainly not you, but many people might overlook sometimes. But surely that's going to be a part of catalogue value as well, as to how well it's been collected on for years.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think even within the last sort of 6 months or so, I'm starting to see a bit more focus on it, honestly, because I think there's been a lot of examples in the past, basically where exactly what you're talking about happened. Someone's spent a lot of money, a very high multiple for a catalog. And then when they sort of, dig into it, they realize actually, there's a lot of things they can't do with the catalog essentially, or at least they're not able to sort of maximize the return in the way that they initially expected to, without some serious, operational lift to get it into shape.
Right.
But I think, on the flip side of that, there's also sometimes an opportunity, because if you know what you're looking for, and very important, if you know how to, fix it as much as it's able to be fixed, there can be a lot of latent opportunity in catalogs, because you might have a major artist catalog that's been generating a lot of money for over a long period of time, but is missing some, deep dive audits and the data. So many catalogs that I've looked at, when you get into the data, it's honestly, well, to me, it's not shocking anymore because I've seen it so many times. But like, if you didn't sort of have that context to look at it in, it's amazing actually. Like the kind of the issues data wise with some really big catalogs, oftentimes is just, key fields missing from the data, or like super kind of, everything I talked about in the first point, really, things to do with like, artist pages being incorrectly mapped and so, and a ton of money being left sort of in a lot of black box areas as well, so that, again, it's a risk, but if, depending on the resources available to the buyer and the sort of knowledge base, it can potentially be flipped into an advantage, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking on here a few weeks ago to Ralph W. Peer at Peer Music, and he was talking in great detail about, the advantages of having boots on the ground in different territories in terms of collection on the song publishing side of things. And, he kind of, he pointed out something that I hadn't really thought about before. He said to me, the nuances of collection from like PRO to PRO to culture are like absolutely massive.
Oh yeah.
You must deal with that all the time.
Yes. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues on the data side in the industry currently, I would say, is basically that sort of interaction and communication between the different CMOs and PROs, around the world. Because exactly as you say, they all have sort of different requirements and different frameworks that they use internally. And, data, it's a strange thing, because to break it down a bit, like, data is a very sort of valuable thing, basically. And in an ideal world, and I think it's something which is achievable potentially over time, there would be essentially a single source of truth when it comes to data. It's something I come across all the time. And, not just in the music industry, I've spoken to people in like the gaming industries and the film and TV industries, and it's sort of the same thing. It comes up again and again and again. It's these sort of siloed off databases that don't have the kind of validation that's needed to be able to sort of fully trust it. And also, when you start to move the data between the different silos, the mapping is just off, and it creates a lot of sort of mess and issues. So I think, it's something the way that can be, it's a big subject. I mean, there's some people working on some potential solutions. There's this, it's a group called the C2PA, and they're developing basically a kind of like a cryptographic signature system that will be embedded into the actual audio file at the time of its creation. And the idea behind that is to sort of make like an immutable stamp that no matter where that file then travels to, it's able to be sort of referenced back. And then that also potentially combats a lot of the issues that, the vast number of issues that are starting to come up around AI.
Wow. That
AI music as well.
How close is that to happening, do you think, Robin? Is it C2PA, you say?
It's C2PA, yeah. I mean, as with anything in the music industry, it comes down to like adoption, I think. Yeah. And it's, there's a lot of people out there who are sort of very vocally advocating for it. There's a person called Virginie Berger, who's sort of one of the top voices, I would say, in this area, particularly around AI and attribution. And she's involved with the C2PA and sort of helping to push that through, as far as I'm aware. But in terms of it actually happening, it's really difficult to say. I think in the short term, it's pretty unlikely, frankly, because the other thing is, the music industry is notoriously kind of political and territorial, and these databases, there's not just, it's the DSPs as well, it's the labels, it's all different kind of, parties within the industry. It's, as I said, data inherently is valuable, and they view their own data as valuable. And so to utilize something like the C2PA or like some kind of blockchain technology, which is another area people have talked about a lot in this with regards to this, would essentially mean them sort of relinquishing some control of their data. And, I think from a sort of conceptual point of view, and in terms of what would, ultimately very likely benefit the composers and creators and the rights holders, it would be a great thing. But whether or not, as I said, that's actually likely to be, actually scalable and implementable in the near term, I have no idea.
Yeah, that would be so nice, wouldn't it? It would solve so many problems. I mean, we are beginning to kind of see new standards, for DDEX, whereby the use of AI tools in the creation of recorded music must be declared by right holders. But if it's not declared, then, in theory, the technology on something like that is there to then detect it if it's not declared. Is that the idea?
It is, but I mean, it's interesting. There are services out there, probably the most well-known at the moment being Deezer, who claim to be able to detect like 100%, AI generated audio. And I think the results of that are looking pretty good. But there's a lot, when you start to kind of dig into it, there's a lot of other sort of discrepancies and issues to look at. And, I think firstly, just on that audio side, something that's happening a lot at the moment is people are finding ways to sort of game the system. And with relatively, few tweaks, you're able to disguise sort of a lot of the artifacts that are left over in sort of fully AI generated audio by doing things like, messing with the EQ or re-recording things and so on and so forth. It's a little bit similar. I don't know if you remember this, but sort of in the 2000s, the kind of somewhat at the start of the digital side of the industry, there was quite a few sort of companies out there who would take like PD, public domain material, and they'd like re-record it through like a speaker or something, and then claim that as a new master, and therefore try and sort of monetize it worldwide. And I think it's somewhat analogous to that, the current situation in terms of what people are able to do with AI, and it's going to become more sophisticated, and so I think there's already as I said, detection systems at work at Deezer and some other DSPs, as I understand it. But then you can also kind of get into like the semantics of it in terms of like, well, what is AI generated music? Is it just audio? Because if it's just audio, I think the answer is there's a good probability that, people will be able to flag the majority of purely AI generated audio in the near future. But then what happens when someone is using AI to complete a melody line or to finish a lyric, or or taking like a AI generated song and then recording it on organic instruments and as a band or whatever? It becomes much more of like a musicologist question, I think, and then that's really, really difficult to unpack, because that brings up a whole question of, well, some people might say, isn't that just the same as plagiarism and influence or subconscious influences existed for a long, long time? Isn't this just the same thing?
Well, I do worry a little bit long term there about the music publishing sector in regards to that, because the intangible is becoming harder to protect. If the tangible is easier to protect, i.e. what you alluded to there, the recorded music, then we can say, okay, we can build that into future technologies and we can detect it and keep a track of it, trace it, remunerate it based on usage, etc. However, the difficulty behind that is the point of ideation. And I know a lot of people now are using AI, I should say, for that initial starting point. Let's use this tool to get this idea going, and then we'll replace it with humans or different technologies so that we can't track it. And I understand that, and it makes sense, but there's a problem with it, and that sits in the intangible, right? What songs were being listened to, what point can you prove, the traditional aspects of infringement on a song copyright as opposed to the recording. I'm not sure. I do worry a little bit about music publishing future. By the way, I'm a big supporter of AI, but that aspect, it does make me think, does that diminish the actual power of the song and empower the actual recording of it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And, I know there are services out there now that are kind of looking at it more or attempting to look at it more on this level in terms of analyzing the actual music, the melody and the chord structures, etc., to look for sort of patterns that are recognized against, pre-existing, configurations. But, the trouble is, again, it's like, well, how can you prove that that's AI, or is that just inspiration? Or, it's a really difficult thing. And all I'm seeing so far, really, on the publishing side, it's great that they're already starting to take some steps. I think, it's important that they are overall, I would say, generally speaking, siding on the side of the songwriter and sort of trying to, respect that. But a lot of it seems to be coming down to sort of, essentially people having to volunteer the information at the point of registration. And like you said, unless you've got a very sort of strong moral compass, as a very good portion of songwriters do, because I'm sure a lot of them would be, at pains to point out that something isn't AI generated, or at least in total, you know what I mean? So it's kind of, but if you're sort of relying on goodwill and trust, it's a bit tenuous to say the least.
I suppose really then the ultimate question from that then becomes, do you think that we'll ever reach a point whereby, technology and legislation can actually fuse together at some point in the future? I know a little bit way off it yet, but in order to support that sort of deeper recognition and remuneration for rights holders when their pre-existing copyrights are used within new copyrights. So instead of, let's say, I don't know, boycotting tools like Suno, they exist in a new ecosystem that respects data that it trains on and actually recognises fragments of use within new recordings and then credits the original rights holders. I know we have to have the technology in order to get there, and that's probably going to come before legislation anyway. But do you think it's possible, Robin?
I think the answer is yes, but it's basically only if the sort of the structures and economic frameworks that are being built at the moment can catch up with the technology. I think, to me, honestly, it feels like we're already at the stage where it's somewhat comparable to Napster.
Yeah.
In the early noughties, because except this time the assets that are being copied aren't files; they're basically creative DNA. So it's a tough one. I think the scraping's already happened, basically, and we can't put the genie back in the bottle. So it becomes now like, can we build a fair system on top of that? I think with Napster, it's very well known that it took too long to respond, and then it was essentially, or ultimately, artists that paid the price for that.
Yeah.
So I think, like licensing, provenance, rights infrastructure, it needs to become mandatory and sort of machine readable before the economics collapse, not after, basically.
Yeah. The recognition leads to then building a model to license it, doesn't it? I suppose it's a bit of a way to go, isn't it? But things are moving so quickly that it's so hard to keep up with sometimes. Let's talk about campaign rollouts. So what sort of differences are you seeing in sort of marketing tactics now compared to, say, a decade ago?
I think there's been a sort of a bit of a switch in terms of, I think we've gone from artists looking to labels for sort of scale and to amplify them, to labels looking to artists for sort of integrity and trust, audience trust.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of different factors that have gone into that. I think, the pandemic obviously was an interesting time because suddenly there was, a scarcity of product in the marketplace. So they kind of had to become a bit more looking at the sort of stories and narratives around artists and sort of long form content and things like that. It's kind of as again, not to keep going on about AI, but it's a very big part of the conversation right now. I think it's like, now anything is sort of, infinitely scalable very, 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 very quickly for basically anybody. But the scarcity is coming in integrity, as I said, and that connection between an artist and their audience. So I think it's sort of, it's becoming, well, it's already become, much more sort of targeted, much more about building, context and storytelling around the artist and around campaigns. At least that's what I've been seeing. And I think on the catalog side, which is mostly where I'm involved, it's actually been a really positive thing, I would say. It's kind of, it's forced the industry to sort of become a bit more, kind of creative around how we celebrate these types of, legacy artists or products.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, let's stick out another reissue or whatever. And now it's, one of the main artists that I'm involved with at the moment is Jose Gonzalez. And I worked with him and his team on the 2023 anniversary reissue of his Veneer album. And that was a really great experience because we sort of decided early on that, the campaign was about the album, but really we were celebrating Jose and his story. And so, we did a really nice, physical, double album with a live set as well. We commissioned some new remixes from some sort of contemporary artists to reimagine the tracks. And we had Logic 1000, we had Bibio and Portico Quartet do sort of versions of his songs. And it was great because, they were all big Jose fans, and it sort of opened up different audience segments for him as well, I think. But overall, I take, when it comes to, catalog marketing, I take the attitude of like a rising tide lifts all ships. So if there's anything that I can do or, that we can do to, increase visibility for the artist and, kind of provide growth, even if it's not directly related to the assets that we're specifically, managing, then I nearly always do it because it's sort of a no-brainer. And then there's always knock-on effects. If the front line starts doing well, then the catalog starts doing well. And if the catalog's being well promoted and there's new releases coming out, that also has a positive impact. So it's a real nice sort of symbiotic thing. And that's something that I'm, increasingly seeing as an opportunity, I think, on the catalog side of things, is sort of, fundamentally looking at legacy and working that side of the catalog, but then doing it in collaboration with, the artists and if there's any, labels or licensees involved or whatever, to sort of just drive overall growth for the artist in general. Yeah. So that's kind of on my side, like what I've been seeing over the last few years. But then it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that, sort of in the same way that music culture of music itself has a way of sort of reacting to things and that have come before, and new generations sort of wipe the slate clean. Think about like punk and then post-punk and whatever it might be. I feel like it kind of works the same way in marketing, so it's for quite a long time now, as I've sort of been mentioning there's this like very much sort of behind the curtain is a positive thing, and Let's let the artist connect directly with the fans and all this stuff, which is, for the right artist and the right campaign, it's a fantastic idea. I'm starting to get the sense that maybe it's reached saturation point though, because with anything, once it becomes formulaic, then it can start to feel, a bit tired and a bit performative.
Right.
If you know what I'm saying. And so I'm starting to just sense a little change. And I wouldn't put it this way. I wouldn't be surprised if in the relatively near future, things take a shift again and go back to slightly more kind of label-led campaigns, and artists sort of try and reclaim a little bit of that mystique, the whole, that association that people have with the old industry, of mystique and so on, which has been very much sort of like a no-no recently, but I don't know. That's my view.
It's really interesting. Robin, can I just say, like, you are so knowledgeable, man. Like, no wonder you're so popular.
Oh, thanks, dude.
Yeah, honestly, it's amazing. There's many things that you're saying that I'm just kind of nodding along with, going, crikey, this guy knows his onions.
Cheers, man.
Oh, yeah, it's true. But that last point is very interesting, right? So the idea of kind of campaign marketing coming back over sort of brand marketing. If you think about social media, it's basically brand marketing. I know loads of managers that really like come down hard on their artists of like, don't just post when you release, like be on there. And then a lot of artists come to me and I go, oh God, I don't know what to post. I'm sick of this. It's not me. I'm not funny. I don't want to be on TikTok. And actually all that falls in line with the previous point you just made, right? Kind of operating in seasons and off seasons. It's not a coincidence that record companies have been doing that for decades. Pooling resources into particular points of the year where they really need them the most is what gives them impact. So, perhaps that might be a way forward. I'm mindful of time, Robin, but I'm enormously grateful to you for your insight here. I just it's brilliant, right? It's fascinating for me to listen to the things that you're saying, because there's so much experience, there's so much knowledge, and your knowledge is not, okay, it's informed by your past, but it's not preoccupied by your past. Your knowledge is right now in 2026, and you're an absolute asset to anybody that works with you, mate. You really are.
Oh, cheers, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for joining me on the podcast here today, Robin. I really appreciate it, and it'd be great to talk to you again at some point in the future.
Of course. No, it was my pleasure, Johnny. And great to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too, Robin. What a dude. Wow. There are so many things I can just tell the certain things that Robin said there in that interview that I'm going to come back to in future episodes, especially the mention of C2PA. Go and have a look at who they are, everybody. I'm going to return back to that subject later in the podcast on another episode. But fascinating guy, right? Some of the things that he outlines there, absolutely superb. It's very important, everybody, to be thinking long term about especially in this world, right? Everything's very instant, isn't it? Nobody's fault, right? It's technology, it's the times we're in. But the point is that we have to look ahead, right? We have to look ahead to, let's say, having a song optimized for this and that. It's done there, it's gone on this editorial place, it's been synced. Wow, look brilliant. But you've got to think about how you're going to collect on that, what that value looks like, especially if you sell it again one day. You might not be planning to do that right now, but later down the line, you might need to know about that. And then somebody like Robin, who comes along with that kind of knowledge that's so detailed, so resourceful, so useful. So I am thrilled that I managed to meet him, to track him down, and to have him on the podcast to share with us some of the things that he knows about, because they are of paramount importance to music creators and to music executives, people from all over the world. Anyway, thank you, Robin. Thank you for being here with me today, everybody. Have a great day ahead, and may the force be with you.